Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda Williams, and today we have a special guest, Frans Stiene. And Franz is the author of several books, including a book we're going to discuss today called The Inner Heart of Reiki, Rediscovering Your True Self. And Franz, you're based in Australia, is that correct?
Indeed, yeah, I'm based in Australia, yes. But I teach all over the world, so I feel more like a world citizen.
Yes. And actually, Franz is currently in San Francisco. And we'll talk about where you're going to be in the next few months throughout this country. And Franz is also the co-founder of the International House of Reiki. But before we get started, I just want to let all of you know, if you have any questions for Franz, be sure to call 323-679-0953 and press the number 1 so that we know you have a question, or you can post any questions in the chat room. So, Franz, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. I was telling Franz before we got on the line how much I enjoyed this book. Again, it's called The Inner Heart of Reiki, and it really resonated with me and my personal practice and so many things that I hadn't heard before. So one of the things I wanted to ask you before we start talking about the book is what your journey with Reiki has been. How did that begin for you? How did you start on this path?
Now that's a good question. Well, it's an interesting journey. I was never really into all of this. And when I was 30, we moved to, I'm originally from the Netherlands. Okay. And when I was 30, we moved to India. And I suffered from when I was about 16 onwards from chronic back problems. And the doctors had always said, that's going to be for the rest of your life, and it only gets worse when you get older, etc. And it did. And so when we were in India, we were in the Himalayas, and I was laying in bed, and my partner was sightseeing, and I think, wow, this is a bit crazy. I'm 30, I can hardly walk and carry my backpack, and that time I made a decision to do something for myself. And one thing led to another. I started to buy different books. I met a local Himalayan healer who did something for me. And then one of the books I bought was a Reiki book. And I started to read it, and I thought, well, it'll be interesting. And then I met a Reiki teacher in Kathmandu, Nepal, and did my first classes there. And then we opened up a Reiki center in Darjeeling, and we did treatments there on the local community for a year, which was absolutely wonderful.
Wow. Okay. And so with everything that you've done, because like you've said, you get to travel the world and teach Reiki, and again, in reading the book, I see that it is so much about our own growth, our own journey, and learning about our true self, which is in the title. But in your personal practice, what have you discovered Reiki to mean or be? What does it mean to you, or what is it to you?
Well, for me, really, it's actually really simple. And for me, if I really think about it, it goes back to the precepts that I feel less angry in my life. I feel less worried in my life. I feel more happy, kind. I feel more true my way and my being. So it's really more about that embodying of the precepts, what I feel has created a kind of a lighter Franz and a happier Franz. And through that, my physical body has responded to that. Right.
And so in the book, you did talk about that, how the 5 precepts, but you also spoke about the 5 signposts of discovering the true self. And, I found that to be very interesting. And I wondered if you could share some more about that with us.
Well, one of the really interesting things for me about Mikusui is that I think there's so much more to know about him and his teachings. And for example, I just posted a little quote on my Facebook page from Mrs. Takata, and Mrs. Takata has been said on a tape that while she was in Japan when she was alive, that she met with some really traditional Reiki teachers who studied with Mikasui, and that she said it was highly complex, it requires years of training, and it was closely intertwined with religious practices. And what is really interesting from that perspective, we can see that, if it was really closely intertwined with these religious practices, not to say that the system of Reiki is religious, but that it really was about you having a religious experience. And from this religious experience, we can therefore help other people. So I always see it that, for me to help others, I need to be a very clear vehicle. And if I'm not a very clear vehicle, then it becomes very difficult.
That is
Are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I am.
No, the computer made a funny sound, and so suddenly I thought it just went gone. But you're still there. That's good.
No, I'm still here.
That's good. The 5 pillars for me are the 5 signposts is the precepts, meditation, hands-on healing, symbols and mantras, and the initiation, or sometimes called attunement or reiju. And by applying these 5 signposts, and I call them signposts because they're all point spiritual energy. And often we see this very external, as if it hangs somewhere outside in the sky. But if we actually really look deeper and we apply these 5 signposts on a daily practice, then we start to rediscover, I am spiritual energy. It is not something external of me.
Yeah, and the book speaks to that a lot, and it's so beautifully done. And, given the title of the book at first, I thought, okay, maybe this will be very helpful to Reiki practitioners. But after reading it, I realized it's a great book for anyone who's really interested in connecting with themselves on deeper levels, or anyone who's interested in discovering what you call the true self. So in your experience and what you are expressing in the book, what does that mean to you, the true self?
I really like Mikasui's metaphor because he, in his Reiki level 3, he used a symbol and a mantra, and if you literally translate, it's the great bright light. And I had a discussion actually this morning with my teacher in Japan by email, and we were talking about the true self, and he was saying, and I really like those kind of teachings, he was saying, when we talk about the true self, sometimes that can be a little bit difficult for people because it's such a wide subject. We can say, what does it mean? And we can debate about it. And so in Japanese, they have a word for it. What is really interesting is not meaning the true self, but if you kind of he was saying that sometimes when we talk too much about the true self, we come to something what is in Japanese what is called keron. And keron, if you translate it, means like a useless argument. And because sometimes then we go, no, this is the true self, and another person said, no, this is the true self, and therefore we get kind of carried away. But what is really wonderful to see that in those teachings of Mikasui, and what was very common at that time in Japanese esoteric teachings, that instead of saying true self, we can say, let's use a metaphor, like a symbolic representation of that true self. So the symbolic representation of the true self is the great bright light. And I like it because we cannot always do hands-on healing. Imagine driving a car, you cannot put your hands on your eyes to do hands-on healing. We cannot always chant a mantra either, because when I'm talking to you, I cannot chant a mantra. We cannot always receive an initiation. We cannot always recite a precept, but we can always rest our mind in that great bright light. And that great bright light is the light of the universe, where there is no beginning and end. So if we see it as there is no beginning and end, then Yolanda's great bright light is touching my great bright light at the same time. So in fact, we're all touching each other at the same time in that space of love and compassion.
Right. And so that goes into the non-duality too, and recognizing our connectedness and our oneness, which you also talk a lot about in the book. And things that comes up a lot with Reiki, a lot of people are focused on, of course, the healing aspect. And you wrote about the meaning of healing and how our mind, our body, and our energy all tie into that. So I also wanted to know if you could share some information with us about that.
Yeah, in Japanese it's called sanmitsu, and sanmitsu, it means mind, body, and speech. And speech is sometimes seen also as energy. So we can say mind, body, and energy. And we kind of really already know that. You know, if you see an angry person walking, so the anger is in their mind, then we can see that in their body. Their body is really tight, their body is really tense, so therefore it's also in their energy. And for me, they're all kind of interconnected with each other. But the most important thing is the mind. And I think this is sometimes not often talked about in the system of Reiki by Reiki teachers, because we only talk often about energy and maybe what we see. We can see a color, or we can feel some tingling or some heat or some other kind of sensation. But in essence, for me, it's really about the mind. And we can really clearly see that in Mikusui's system. If we look at the precept, do not anger, do not worry, be grateful, be true to your way and your being, and show compassion to yourself and others, then that is really all about the mind. It doesn't say feel energy, doesn't say put your hands on someone. It's really all about the mind. And if we look at the mantras of Chokurei, Seiheki, Honsasei Shinen, and Daikomyo, and if we look at it from a traditional Japanese perspective, they actually also all point towards a state of mind. And the state of mind is so important, because if my mind is calm, then my energy is calm. And if my mind is calm, then also my body becomes more calm. So if I want to do it, if I want to help someone and my mind is agitated during the treatment, or I'm constantly judging and labeling and analyzing during the treatment, that means my mind is constantly busy, then it also means my energy is always busy. So therefore, for my client to really start to relax and feel peaceful and going to their great bright light will be very difficult.
You know, it's interesting you say this, because in my experience, I believe Reiki is a very meditative practice. But you also talk about the power of meditation and the importance of this practice in connection to building, you know, our spiritual energy and having that self-connection. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of meditation and how that ties into all of this, and even how that helps us with what we hold in our mind, or what we're connected to by going into that state of practice?
Yeah, I could try something. It's a little bit hard because it's radio and it's internet, you know, but I do this often when I give a live talk. And for example, we have the precepts, and within the precepts, often it says, well, you know, people say recite the precepts 3 times. So for me, reciting is really wonderful and it can help. But reciting is very different than kind of chanting it, or really from a meditative space. So maybe what I do, maybe a little experiment, if you don't mind, Yolanda,
of course.
is I will recite the precepts 3 times in Japanese, and then I will chant it for you and see if we kind of can feel or sense a difference in a way. And I will chant it with my mind a little bit different. So when I recite it, my mind might think about what I'm going to do tonight and see if we can find a difference. So here I go. I will recite the precepts in Japanese. So, Ikaruna simpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni shinsetsu ni gyo dake wa ikaruna simpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni shinsetsu ni gyo dake wa ikaruna simpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni shinsetsu ni. So this kind of reciting. But if I chant it, it becomes for me something quite different. Here I go.
Okay.
And now I'm concentrating my mind even more so. Yo dake wa ikaruna senpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni sensetsu ni. Yo dake wa ikaruna senpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni sensetsu ni. Gyo dake wa ikaruna senpai suna kansha shite gyo hakeme hito ni sensetsu ni. So for me, I always feel that we kind of all know that if I drive a car and I'm distracted, then I'm probably more likely to have an accident. I'm still driving the car, but if I'm driving the car and I'm really focused, then the car driving becomes something quite different. And therefore, if I do hands-on healing and my mind is all over the place, therefore my energy is all over the place. But if my mind is really focused during a treatment or during chanting of the precepts, then it becomes more a meditative practice.
Did
you feel that difference?
Listening to you say it the first time, you know, I closed my eyes and I connected with it because I know to say the principles in that same way. And I did feel something, but I didn't really realize what a significant difference until you started the chanting, and it felt bigger, like this full embodiment where I could feel the energy of it in my entire space. So it made a big difference. Even, you talk about the non-duality and without having separation and how we're connected. Mm-hmm. So there was a very clear difference.
Yeah, so for me, really, I
mean, amazing.
Yeah, I think also if we really think about it, for me, my most important thing is really about teaching about Mikusui. I mean, a lot of people focus about Hayashi or Mrs. Takata, but my main focus is really about Mikusui. And so Mikusui is set to go to Mount Karama for 21 days and meditated for 21 days without water and food. And then he really connected to that Reiki within himself. So, I mean, he's the example. And so my teacher in Japan, he always keeps emphasizing, you know, if Mikusui connected to Reiki, your true self, true meditation practices, then we have to do exactly the same thing. We cannot, just say, throw a magic symbol in the air and suddenly it's there. We have to go through that same process. And it's a really wonderful process. And when we look at the symbols and the mantras, for example, the Japanese word for Reiki 2 is okuden. And Okuden means inner or hidden teachings. And that word itself already states it, Okuden, hidden or inner teachings. It's not something hidden in the symbol or hidden in the cupboard. It's actually pointing out traditionally what is hidden inside of yourself. And that is something we need to rediscover. So therefore, we need to use those symbols and mantras internally, because I need to find what is hidden inside of myself. But if I use the symbols and mantras externally, then it becomes much harder to find what is hidden internally within myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's so great that you bring this up, because I think a lot of people have an idea that if they get a Reiki attunement or, just coming to a class, almost like, just a button is pushed and you don't have to do any practice after that. Like you just, something was turned on and that's it. There's nothing more to it. But you do talk about, and, we talk about this on the show a lot, the benefits of our personal practice and this dedicated practice, and how it also helps us to discover our own way. That was one of the things I have to say in reading your book. I was so thankful that, yes, someone said this, and, we have certain practices in place that can help us to, discover our own way. But can you talk about that, the importance of our personal practice and how it does help us to understand and discover ourselves, like far beyond what we may be taught in class?
Yeah, I think that is a really important element for me and my teachings. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to Japan in May for 3 weeks to train with my teacher, actually 2 teachers, 1 week with one and 2 weeks with the other one. And it will be one-on-one teachings. We go into the mountains, and both of these teachers are really saying, okay, if we want to know what Mikasui was doing, we have to go into the mountains. We have to meditate. We have to really find that Reiki within ourselves. There is no, as you said, there's no magic button what we can press. And, this is another thing often what you hear in the Reiki community or on forums. A lot of people say, oh, I did Reiki 1, 2, or 3, 6 years ago, but I feel it's not working anymore. I need to be reattuned. Well, it's not necessarily that they need to be reattuned. They just need to practice more. Or, for example, nowadays also we see this a lot. Oh, can you send me healing? A lot of people ask for healing. And what is wonderful, don't get me wrong, because it's nice to receive healing and it's nice to, but it also for me is very much a thing where we always look externally instead of, hey, let me look deep inside of me. And can I find that healing power within myself? And for me, the whole system of Reiki is really about empowering yourself. So, for example, the Reiki 3 symbol and mantra, Daikomyo, what is said, means empowerment, has become very externalized and said, oh, you only use it during an empowerment on someone. But actually, traditionally, it was about self-empowering. So the symbol and mantra was about you empowering yourself, because I cannot empower other people if I haven't empowered myself. I always say in class, I cannot give you tea if I don't have tea. It's impossible. Or we all know that I cannot give you love and compassion if I'm not really love and compassionate to myself.
Right. And even with that, you talk about intimacy, which I thought was, very interesting also to read. You talk about intimacy and the idea of being Reiki versus doing Reiki. So can you talk some more about that? Yeah.
Well, the intimacy is really, first of all, for me to really find that inner great bright light, because we have covered it up with all these layers of worries and fear. I cannot do it. I'm not. With ourselves. And what I mean by that is also we have to become, therefore, very honest with ourselves. We have to look beyond that ego kind of thing, the I thing. So it's very, very intimate. And when we work with someone else, we have to be intimate with them. But I think sometimes we get a bit confused that intimate means sex. I'm not talking about sex, but really that intimacy is so close that that we come back to that non-dual space or the oneness space again, you know? Mm-hmm. Then we're really intimate. And if you think about it, if you lay on the table and I place my hands on you to do some hands-on healing, then most of the time for the observer, they might say, oh, Franz is doing hands-on healing on Yolanda, or Franz is touching Yolanda. But if you really look carefully, then you are touching me at the same time, right?
Right.
Because your body is touching my hand at the same time your energy is touching me and my energy is touching you. So that's really that intimacy where what we have to see is that, oh, actually, it looks like Franz is touching Yolanda, but if I look carefully, it's an intimate dance where not only Franz is touching Yolanda, but Yolanda is also touching Franz.
Even you talking about that, it reminds me of the section of the book where you're talking about protection. And, you know, there's a lot of ideas around that and what we give or pick up and all of these things energetically from other people. Although, I mean, even outside of Reiki, just in our daily interactions, like we're exchanging energy and we're connected with each other. So I don't think it's even just in the realm of having a session. But
I agree.
It reminded me of this session that I had actually not that long ago, and you spoke about in the book about how someone may see something, say like smoke coming out of a person's face, and they may think that it's bad and they label it this way. So I had a session where I saw something, you know, that we may look at and think it's not so pretty. But I remembered, because a teacher of mine told me to see the light in all things, because everything is light. And, you know, what we hold in mind, just like what you speak of, it transforms things energetically. Like the energy we put into or how we hold it or how we perceive it affects what it is or what it becomes.
Yeah. You fell away for a second, so that's okay.
Sorry. But so it was interesting the way that you spoke about protection, and I was wondering if you could talk about that and how us recognizing the light within us and how that in of itself is our protection.
Yeah, I mean, like we can always build up like a barrier. So if I do a treatment on someone and I have to protect myself, then in a way I'm creating a barrier between my client and me. And also, if I build a barrier, then the barrier can be touched, and it can be, even if it's a mind barrier. If there is no barrier, I cannot damage the sunlight. I cannot cut it. I cannot hurt it. I cannot blow it up. It's untouchable, and yet we benefit from it. So if we become that light, then we realize the same thing. There's no need for protection. We can just be very open and expanded. But this is why I think it's so important in the system of Reiki. Also, we can see that in level 1, where you're being taught the Joshin Kokyuho traditionally, what is like a breathing meditation practice, into the Hara, what is just below your belly button. That if we do that, then we become really stable. We become really grounded and centered. In the second level, the first symbol, where if you visualize it and you visualize that it's like a circle what goes inwards, then again our mind goes inwards and actually it becomes more grounding. So that first symbol and mantra also has a very grounding nature to it. And I think that is so important to, as a practitioner, as a teacher, to make sure that we're centered and grounded Because then we actually start to realize over time we don't have to disconnect ourselves because it's impossible, because we're always interconnected already.
Right.
You know?
And that's a really interesting thing, too, that you bring up, because in this realm, I think a lot of people focus a lot on, in terms of chakras, say. They would focus more on their upper chakras, and people connect that idea to just their spiritual energy and kind of negate the grounding aspect and, you know, our lower dandian and all of that. So could you talk about how that is beneficial to us, like that grounding and being here and centered and connected?
Yeah, one of my teaching tools, I like teaching tools because either a visual or teaching stories. And one of the teaching tools I always travel around with is a Weeble Wobble. Do you know those Weeble Wobbles?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
yes.
The toy.
So Weebles wobble, but they don't fall. And so in the class, I always put the Weeble Wobble on the table. I give it a whack, and it starts to weeble, and it comes back up. And I asked the students, I said, why isn't it falling over? And I said, because the weight is at the bottom. And I said, well, this happens normally in our life. A client says something, or during a treatment we see something, or we feel something, we experience something, and we fall over. And we stay worried and fearful and angry and upset for 1 week or for a day or for 6 months. And then finally we get back up again a little bit. But if we are like a Weeble Wobble, then we can feel those things because the Weeble Wobble is still moving, but actually very quickly we come back up again. And that comes only if we really have a very strong foundation, or that our mind and energy is really at the bottom of our body.
Very interesting.
And we can see this too in nature, you know, like, for example, again, Mikosui went into the mountains to really connect to Reiki, to his true self. But true self is also the mountain, is also the tree. And Japanese spiritual teachings, the mountain is also seen as I said, as Reiki. And if you look, for example, at Mikosui's name he got after he died in Japan, when you died and afterwards you get a name, the first 2 characters of his name is Reizan, what means the mountain of Reiki. And therefore, also, we have to become like a mountain. A mountain, the mountain top is, mountains don't grow that way. Mountains of Reiki that points towards make yourself as stable like the Weeble Wobble or like a mountain, so that we can grow really high and reach heaven.
That makes perfect sense. Again, it's one of those things that you don't hear much in, you know, just in general conversation about Reiki. And there's so much in your book that you touch on that I think would be so beneficial, again, like I said, not only to practitioners, but to anyone who's really looking to connect with themselves on deeper levels. But from reading your book and thinking about how many different practices and teachings that there are out there, it seems very clear that part of your journey is focused on understanding what the system of Reiki really is about as it was practiced by Usui. So with all that you've learned and experienced over the years, what would you want people to know and understand about Reiki, or what is that takeaway that you usually hope that you instill in your students?
Well, one of the most important things, what I see more and more in my classes, and that is specifically also the deeper I am going in my own practice within the system of Reiki, that they can really feel that groundedness and centeredness, but also that they really have a direct experience of that non-dual space. Now, we can talk about for hours about non-duality or oneness, but actually within particularly our Reiki 3 classes, the way it's structured and some of the practices we do with hands-on healing, with the symbols and the mantras, we actually for most of us, gain a very direct experience of this non-duality. And also, they get a really direct experience of being Reiki instead of doing Reiki. And and that is something I think what a lot of students take away. For example, I had a student in a class just recently. I was teaching in Canada, where I was just thinking, where was I again? So in Canada, and one of the ladies in the class, he had done like you about maybe 6-7 different Reiki teacher classes with some Japanese teachers, with some Western teachers, and then when we were actually practicing the attunements, initiations, or Reiju with each other, her comment was, I have never felt anything like this before. This is really taking me to a very different place of intimacy, of non-duality, of oneness. And she said, this for me helps me to also understand, therefore, that it's not just about doing a ritual, but it's actually about a way of life. Yes. That we can lead a way of life of being intimate with nature, intimate with our surroundings, in that non-dual space of love and compassion and kindness.
It's interesting, even that comment, it just brings you all the way back to the precepts or the Reiki principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, those, the Reiki principles, because I think a lot of times it's taught as just something to memorize. And from what you've shared, it seems more like something to embody and to really become. And it does become a way of life. And, when I first learned, I told people, I would joke that they became mantras for me throughout my day, going through different experiences in life and connecting with the energy of whichever one fit the moment. But one of the things that also comes up a lot around Reiki, and I wanted to ask you about, was the distance sessions, because it was really interesting what you wrote about that, as far as, whether or not you need a proxy and connecting to that being Reiki, like you've been talking about, and connecting to that oneness. So could you share your ideas around that in the distant practice?
Yeah, actually what is really interesting, the mantra for that Honsha session, and if you kind of translate it, we can translate it as, my original nature is a non-dual thought, or in other words, I am having a non-dual thought. So it doesn't say anything about distance. It's really saying about that non-dual thought, or that oneness, that interconnectedness. And in that oneness space, really, if we set the intent of love and compassion and kindness, again, really about the precepts, or not being angry and not being worried, then in a way we don't really need permission. I always say, if I walk in the street and I see someone walking towards me, I'm not going to stop them and say, excuse me, do you mind if I just... Really, that is what the system of I think in some traditions is really about doing Reiki. So you kind of are judging and labeling. So say you do a distance healing on someone, and you label and judge or distinguish, this is good, this is bad, this needs an emotional healing symbol, this needs some extra power, this needs some... So we're also kind of doing something to someone. And I think if we're doing something to someone, I think in a way we need to have a certain permission. But if we're just being Reiki and let go of the doing, and this is again where I like the Reiki tree symbol and mantra, the great bright light, then we are like the sun. The sun doesn't ask permission to shine. The sun also doesn't say, oh, that person over there needs 2 rays of sunshine. The person over there gets 10 rays, and the person over there gets nothing. The sun is just shining that wonderful light, but we take accordingly to what we need. And this also is pointed out in the word Reiki itself. Within the word Rei, or spiritual, traditionally it stood in a way, it's the non-dual rain. But it's the same thing. If it rains, the rain is not saying, I'm going to rain 2 drops on that little flower over there, and I'm going to rain 6 buckets on the big tree. The rain is just raining without any judging, labeling, or distinguishing. And the trees, the shrubs, the people, the animals, they take accordingly. And healing is a little bit limiting, because if I walk on the street, I cannot touch everybody and say, excuse me, can I do some hands-on healing? Excuse me. I'll be in trouble. But I can walk around in this great bright light of no anger, no worry, no fear, being grateful and being kind and compassionate. And from that kind and compassionate, no anger, worry, brightness space, what has a huge energetic potential, people can already start to heal themselves. That makes sense a little bit? Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. It does. And it's an interesting thing. I had the very first time I had an experience with that, and it was prior to Reiki. I didn't know anything about energy work. And I met a woman who was, she was Buddhist. I forget what she's referred as, maybe a lama. And as you got closer to this woman, you could literally feel like your energy shifting, and there was something radiating off of this woman, and you just felt like you were melting and just at peace, just coming closer and closer into her space. And I'll never forget that. And when I read what you were talking about in the book, what you just shared, that's what it reminded me of. And how her energy, not doing anything, her just being was shifting the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, we can see that in people like the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. When I was in Japan in 2003, I met a Buddhist priest who in Japan was seen as a living Buddha. And just talking to him for 5 minutes, it was amazing. The energy and the shifts and the healing. I thought I received 10 initiations and 5 treatments in one go. And he was like a 7-Eleven. He was open 24 hours a day. But the most exciting thing was that when the next day when I was thinking about it, and I thought, wow, he is just like you and me. He's just like any other human being. What means that we all have the potential within us. We just have to remember it. And this is why Mikusui really said, okay, meditate upon the precepts, see hands-on healing as meditation, meditate on the mantras, meditate on the symbols, meditate the breathing practices like Joshin Koki-ho and Hatsure-ho, do the meditation practice of initiation or reiju or attunement, and by applying those, then we can all be in this beautiful, great, bright light. And I think that really would make a huge difference in the world. I mean, hands-on healing on other people, of course, can make a difference in the world, but the world will become very, very different if we all start to embody the precepts.
Yes. And I think that's what it all comes back to. I mean, us doing the work on ourselves and recognizing that light in ourselves and, you know, strengthening that light and spreading it out, which, you know, you've done in this book. And I am very thankful that I got to talk to you about this. And hopefully, you know, because there's so much that you discussed that there's no way we could have covered in this hour. But hopefully people will, you know, get the book, read the book, because it does have so much good information in there. One of the things I wanted you to share before we go today is what your workshops are, because you have Reiki classes, but you have other types of workshops. So what do you offer, and where will you be in the next few months?
So actually, I'm starting on this Friday. I'm teaching in Sonoma in California, and that's a Shimponen Reiki 3 class. They are 3-day classes. But the 3-day classes for me is really the beginning. So after that, we hold hands with each other and we walk that path of Mikasui's teachings. Then also I do what I call like a Reiki play day, which is a 1-day class where we just experiment what Mikasui's teachings were about. I don't really focus a lot on historical sites. I really, because we can talk about history till we're blue in the face, but for me, again, the most important thing is having that direct experience of the precepts, or having that direct experience of your true self, or of that great bright light. And so I will be in Cincinnati in a week's time. Then I'm doing 3 4-day Reiki retreats here in the U.S. this year. So one in California, just about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. One near Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and one that's in September, and one in June in the border of Massachusetts, Vermont. And then I will be teaching in New York. I will be teaching in some other places. So too many. I always get confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
what
is the best way for people to connect with you? Which website, or in your Facebook? How can we find you online?
Yeah, so you can look at my website, what is www.ihreiki.com. And every week we have new blogs coming up. We have one of the biggest blog sections on the web about the system of Reiki. Then we have the IH Reiki Facebook page, or International House of Reiki. And then I also have a Frans Stiene Facebook page, what is a little bit more personal, but you can look that up as well.
And then once you leave here, you'll be teaching back in Europe again, or are you taking a break?
Yeah, actually, after this has been a very busy time. After this trip, I'll be home in Australia for a week, and then kind of most of May, I'm in Japan doing my own personal training, because I also believe that, you know, as a teacher, we also still need to have teachers, and we have to go deeper. Yes. So that's one of my personal practices. So going into the mountains, and my teachers are, one of them is a Shingon priest and a Tendai priest and a Shugendo priest. So I train with them, and my focus for those training is really about what would have Mikasui practiced himself when he was undergoing his own training. And for me to see that, because if we look at Chokurei, Seiheki, Honsei and Daikomyo, for example, we see very clear traces to Japanese esoteric teachings. And so that is what I'm exploring a lot myself. But again, most important for me is to have that direct experience. And so after 3 weeks in May in Japan, then I'll be back in the US in June for a retreat in Vermont, or it's on the border, Vermont, Massachusetts, and a Shimponen training in New York. And then I'm going back to Australia. Then I teach a retreat in the north of Australia, what is absolutely wonderful. It's kind of on the beach, so that's one of my favorite retreat places there. And so it's a busy year this year, but I love it. And it's another thing.
Yeah.
What I really enjoy about it is creating a beautiful Reiki community on a global level where we can communicate and share and practice together.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful thing. And one of the things, too, I wanted to make sure to check with you or ask you about before you go is, again, with the title of the book, The Inner Heart of Reiki, Rediscovering the True Self, is that really, in your opinion, what Reiki is all about? Is it ultimately about us discovering our true self? And how would you even describe Reiki to someone who's curious about it, hasn't had any experience with it?
Normally, if I say it in a very simple way, then I might say the system of Reiki is a spiritual practice, or sometimes I can leave the spiritual out, a practice to rediscover your true self. And then maybe they might say, what does it mean, your true self? Then I might say, well, that means that we lead a life what is less angry, less worried, less fearful, more grateful, more being true to our way in our being, and more compassionate. So it's very simple in a way, but very profound to actually practice. And then I might say, oh, how do you do it? How do you practice it? And then I say, well, within it we have precepts, hands-on healing, meditation, symbols and mantras, and initiation to help us to remember this true self.
Yeah.
And from this true self, from this rediscovering this great bright light, because as we all know, the more closer to the light we go, the more compassion we have, the more energy we will have. So therefore, from this rediscovery, oh, I think you fell away again.
Oh, no, you just came back in. Yeah, I was worried for a moment. I'm like, oh, we lost him, but you're back.
I know. We're all sometimes a bit lost, and that's why we have to practice the system of Reiki.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I'm, very thankful for Reiki, which is why even, I started the podcast to, try to create community around this and open conversation around it, because it opened that doorway for me to start to look at who I am and connect with who I am. And I think it's such a beautiful practice for that reason. And hopefully with everything that you've shared today, I'm sure you've shed so much light about the practice and how it can be used intentionally. So I am very thankful for you coming on today. And I just wanted to say, hopefully maybe you'll come back when you do another book, because I'm sure there'll be more that you have to write and share. Yeah. But I'm looking
working
forward
on
to
book already, so that's good.
Are you really? This book just came out in what, October?
I know.
Yeah.
I just had felt I had other things to say, and I think also, I think there's so much more hidden within Japan itself about Mikusui, what slowly I think will come forward, and so it will be an interesting time, I think. But I must say, you asked wonderful questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and, clearly spreading more light for all of us. So thank you so much. And I just want to let everyone know that if you would like to find out more about Franz and his work, again, you can go to his website, which is ihreiki.com, and that's the IH is for International House of Reiki.com. And to purchase his latest book, The Inner Heart of Reiki, be sure to visit Amazon.com, or you can click on the link that's provided in the show description. And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. And remember to always journey in love.